High school memories linger like the smell of old books. I first laid eyes on Julie in the school cafeteria, where sunlight spilled through dirty windows, painting her hair gold. I couldn't stop staring at her, and soon enough my crush morphed into something stronger. Gathering courage, I asked her out by the lockers one day, heart pounding louder than the morning bell. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind that made you feel good. "Caleb, you're sweet," she said, looking at me with those eyes that could pierce through armor. "But I've got my eye on someone else." She didn't have to say who. Everyone knew she had a thing for Tommy. Tommy was my best friend since middle school, the kind of guy who never needed to try hard to get what he wanted. Anger boiled in me, but I couldn't direct it at him or her. It just simmered below the surface, mingling with the disappointment. Years later, we met again in college. It was during a random economics lecture. She sat 2 rows ahead, twirling a pen in her fingers, and that same golden hair caught the light. After class ended, she approached me with a smile that felt like it came from a different time. "Caleb, long time no see," she said. I tried to play it cool, but my voice cracked. "Julie, hey, how have you been?" She suggested we catch up over coffee, and before I knew it, we were talking like old friends who never had a falling out. When she asked me on a date, I nearly choked on my latte. "You sure?" I asked. "Yeah," she said with a laugh that was more musical than I remembered. "I've been thinking about you." The date went better than I thought it would. We talked about everything and nothing, from favorite movies to our high school days. She even apologized for turning me down back then. "I was young and stupid," she admitted. "Tommy was just there." We laughed about it and moved on. Years rolled by like chapters in a well-worn book. Julie and I fell into an easy rhythm of life together. Trips to the beach, late-night talks under starry skies, simple moments that turned into cherished memories. One spring afternoon, under a canopy of blooming cherry blossoms, I got down on one knee and proposed. Her eyes filled with tears as she said yes. Our wedding day felt like a dream wrapped in reality, a promise sealed in love and trust. And here we are now, building our life together brick by brick, moment by moment. In my mind, our marriage was as perfect as a summer's day. Julie and I had been discussing the idea of starting a family. Her eyes would light up whenever she talked about having kids, and it filled me with a warmth that made every day feel like a gift. But recently, something had shifted. Julie seemed more distant, her laughter less frequent, her smiles forced. I tried not to think too much of it, blaming it on the busy schedules and mundane routines of married life. Yet, the growing silence between us gnawed at me. One night, after Julie had gone to bed early, I sat alone in the living room, my mind churning with worries. The thought that she might be getting bored with me crept in like an unwelcome guest. I grabbed my phone and texted Tommy, "Hey man, you free? Need to talk." He replied almost instantly, "Yeah, come over." Tommy lived only a few blocks away. When I arrived, he greeted me with a beer and that easygoing smile of his. "What's up?" he asked, leading me to the couch. I took a deep breath. "I think Julie's getting bored with me." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Why do you say that?" "She's been distant lately. Hardly talks to me anymore," I confessed. "Have you tried talking to her about it?" I shook my head. "No, I'm afraid it'll just make things worse." Tommy leaned back and took a sip of his beer. "Caleb, you gotta communicate with her. Just be honest about how you're feeling." His words hit me harder than I expected. It seemed so simple when he said it. The next evening after dinner, I mustered up the courage to talk to Julie. "Julie," I started cautiously, "can we talk for a minute?" She looked up from her book and nodded. "I've noticed you've been distant lately," I said. "Is everything okay?" Julie sighed deeply and set the book aside. "Caleb, I'm sorry if I've seemed off. Work has been incredibly stressful these past few weeks." Relief washed over me like a wave. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to burden you," she admitted softly. I reached out and took her hand. "You could never be a burden to me." Her eyes softened and she smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you for understanding." Later that night, I called Tommy. "Hey man," I said when he picked up. "Thanks for the advice. Turns out she's just been stressed because of work." "Glad to hear it worked out," Tommy replied. "I owe you a drink," I said, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "You got it," he laughed. For now, things felt right again. Finally, it was Friday. The week had dragged on like a bad movie, but I was relieved to be done with work for a few days. I thought it'd be the perfect time to treat Tommy to that drink I owed him. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number. It rang and rang and rang some more. Weirdly, he didn't answer. Shrugging it off, I decided to get a case of beer and surprise him at his place. Pulling up to Tommy's house, I saw something that made my heart sink. Julie's car was parked in his driveway. My stomach twisted into knots, suspicion gnawing at me like a persistent itch. I parked my car down the street and approached Tommy's house cautiously, my mind racing. Why was Julie here? A part of me hoped she had some innocent explanation, but another part of me feared the worst. Quietly, I walked around the side of the house, looking for a way in without alerting them. I found an unlocked window in the kitchen and carefully slid it open. The creak of the window sounded like a gunshot in the stillness of the evening. Climbing inside as silently as possible, I made my way through the darkened house, my footsteps light against the hardwood floor. As I approached the living room, muffled voices drifted toward me. Peeking around the corner, my breath caught in my throat. There they were, Tommy and Julie, half naked and tangled in each other's arms on his couch. Rage and betrayal surged through me in equal measure. Without thinking, I stepped into the room. "What the hell is this?" My voice came out louder than I intended. Julie gasped and scrambled to cover herself with a throw blanket. Tommy jumped up, fumbling for his clothes. "Caleb, wait!" Julie pleaded, her eyes wide with panic. "I can explain!" I couldn't bear to look at them any longer. The sight of them together felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Turning on my heel, I walked off in disgust, their frantic voices trailing behind me as I left. "Caleb, please!" Julie's voice cracked with desperation. But her words fell on deaf ears. The man who would take a bullet for his best friend had just been shot through the heart by him instead. I drove back to our apartment, my mind racing faster than the car. The betrayal burned hot in my chest, each breath a struggle against the anger bubbling up inside me. Pulling into the driveway, I barely remembered to turn off the engine before I stumbled out, fumbling with my keys as I rushed to the front door. Inside, the apartment felt suffocating, memories clinging to every corner. I went straight to the bedroom and yanked a duffel bag from under the bed. Clothes, toiletries, anything I could grab quickly went into it. The familiar scent of Julie's perfume lingered in the air, turning my stomach. In the living room, I hesitated for a moment by our framed wedding photo. Her smile looked so genuine there, like a cruel joke now. I grabbed the frame and threw it into the bag too, not even sure why. Maybe it was spite, or maybe just a need to hold on to something from before everything shattered. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, Julie's name flashing on the screen. Each vibration felt like a stab wound reopening. "Caleb, please talk to me," her messages read. "It's not what you think." I couldn't handle it anymore. With shaking hands, I switched my phone to airplane mode and tossed it into the bag. Grabbing my stuff, I left our apartment behind like a bad dream. The night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. The drive to the hotel was a blur of streetlights and darkened storefronts. At the hotel, I checked in under a false name, hoping for anonymity in this small escape from reality. The room smelled of stale air conditioning and old carpet, nothing welcoming about it. But it was better than being at home. I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time that night, tears stung at my eyes, but I fought them back. Crying wouldn't solve anything. I stared up at the ceiling, thoughts swirling around like leaves caught in a storm. How had everything gone so wrong? Tommy, my best friend, and Julie, my wife, betraying me in ways that cut deeper than any knife. The silence of the room pressed in on me as I tried to think about my next move. There was no easy answer here, no simple way to mend what had been broken. But for now, All I could do was lie there and try to make sense of it all while trying not to drown in my own heartbreak. After work, I found myself standing outside our apartment door, the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. My hand trembled as I slid the key into the lock and pushed the door open. The familiar scent of our home greeted me, but it felt foreign now, tainted by betrayal. Julie sat on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. When she saw me, she burst into fresh tears. "Caleb," she sobbed, rushing toward me. "Please, let me explain." I held up a hand to stop her. "Talk." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I've been having an affair with Tommy." My heart clenched at her words, even though I already knew. Hearing it from her lips made it all too real. "It started recently," she continued. He took advantage of my feelings for him." I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean?" Julie wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I still have a bit of a crush on him, and he knew that. He seduced me, Caleb. I was weak and stupid." Her confession stung like salt in an open wound. Anger and hurt twisted inside me, but so did something else, an unwillingness to give up on what we had built together. "Why?" My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay strong. "I don't know," she whispered, looking down at her feet. "I wasn't thinking clearly, but I love you, Caleb. Please believe me." Silence stretched between us like a chasm. "I want to try to forgive you," I said finally, my voice strained. "But things have to change." Julie looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "Anything, Caleb. I'll do anything." "You have to earn back my trust," I said firmly. "I need access to your phone and messages at all times." She nodded vigorously, tears still streaming down her face. "Of course. Whatever it takes." Reluctantly, I reached out and took her hand in mine. It felt both comforting and foreign. "We'll get through this," I said more to myself than to her. She clung to my hand as if it were a lifeline. And so we stood there in our living room, two broken people trying to piece together what had been shattered by betrayal and deceit. The next morning, I made Julie block and cut off all contact with Tommy. She handed me her phone without protest, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and desperation. I watched as she deleted his number and blocked him on every platform. It was a small step, but it felt like the beginning of something. Whether it was healing or just more pain, I couldn't tell yet. Tommy tried to reach out to me multiple times over the next few days. He called, texted, even left voicemails that I didn't bother listening to. Each time my phone buzzed with his name on the screen, a fresh wave of anger washed over me. Then one day, as I was leaving the grocery store, I saw him standing by my car. His eyes looked tired, almost haunted. I tried to walk past him, but he stepped into my path. "Caleb, please," he said, his voice raw. "We need to talk." I didn't respond and tried to push past him again. "Just hear me out," he pleaded. Reluctantly, I stopped and faced him. "What do you want?" Tommy took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, man. I never meant to betray you." My jaw tightened. "Really? Because it sure seems like you did." "I've been rejecting Julie since high school because I knew how you felt about her," he said quickly. "But she kept coming after me, and I finally gave in. I regret it more than you can imagine." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Julie said you seduced her," I snapped. "That's a lie," Tommy insisted, his eyes blazing with sincerity. "Caleb, she's playing you. You need to get rid of her." Rage boiled over inside me. "You think I'm going to believe you over my wife? You always got all the girls, Tommy. You had everything handed to you, and now you want to take this from me too?" Tommy's face fell as he heard my rant. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something else, but decided against it. "Caleb, get away from me!" I growled through clenched teeth. He stepped back slowly, defeated but still trying to reach me with his eyes. As he walked away, I felt a twisted mix of vindication and sorrow tightening in my chest like a vice grip that wouldn't let go. Julie started treating me like I was the most important person in the world. Breakfast in bed, surprise date nights, spontaneous declarations of love. It was like living in a dream, but instead of making me feel cherished, it just made me resent her more. Why couldn't she have treated me this way from the beginning? It felt like she was overcompensating for her betrayal, and it only served as a constant reminder of what she had done. I tried to push the betrayal behind me, to focus on rebuilding our relationship. But Tommy's words haunted me, echoing in my mind whenever I looked at Julie. Was she really playing me? Every smile, every touch, felt tainted with suspicion. I found myself questioning her every move, dissecting every interaction for signs of deceit. Despite my efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were not as they seemed. Trusting her became a Herculean task, one that seemed to grow more difficult with each passing day. Months went by, and the special treatment started to wane. Julie's efforts to win back my trust faded into the background as we slipped back into our old routines. The grand gestures stopped, replaced by the mundane rhythms of everyday life. Yet something fundamental had changed. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was now a fragile thing, easily shattered by a stray thought or a careless word. Julie noticed my lingering doubts, but seemed unsure how to address them. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, she turned to me and asked softly, "Are we okay?" I wanted to say yes, to reassure her that everything would be fine, but the words caught in my throat. "I don't know," I admitted finally. Her face fell and she looked away, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm trying so hard," she whispered. "I know," I replied, my voice hollow, "but it's not enough." Silence stretched between us as we sat there, two people trying to find their way back to each other, but unable to bridge the gap that had formed between us. No matter how much time passed or how hard Julie tried, I couldn't bring myself to fully trust her again. And without trust, what did we really have left? After everything came to light, the divide among our friends became painfully clear. Most of them thought Tommy was in the wrong for betraying me, but they also thought I was an idiot for only cutting him off and not Julie. At first, I tried to ignore their opinions. It was my life, my marriage, and no one else's business. But their whispers followed me everywhere, at the bar, during pickup basketball games, even at the grocery store. One night, I met up with Mark, a mutual friend who'd always been a straight shooter. We sat in our usual booth at O'Malley's pub, nursing our beers. He looked at me with that same no-nonsense expression he always had. "Caleb," he started, his voice low, "I've been hearing some things about Julie." I took a long sip of my beer, trying to keep my face neutral. "What kind of things?" He leaned in closer, glancing around as if someone might overhear us. "People are saying she's been seen around town with another guy. This isn't just about Tommy." I felt my stomach twist, but forced myself to stay calm. "Who's saying this?" Mark shrugged. "You know how it is. Word gets around. I don't have names, but enough people have mentioned it that I thought you should know." I wanted to dismiss it outright, call it baseless gossip, but a part of me couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that had taken root since that night I caught her with Tommy. "Thanks for telling me," I said finally, not really sure if I meant it. "Just keep your eyes open," Mark replied, before changing the subject to something lighter. We talked about work and sports for the rest of the evening, but Mark's warning echoed in my mind long after we left the pub. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe everyone else saw something I was too blinded by love, or maybe stubbornness, to see. The weight of those rumors pressed down on me as I pulled into our driveway and walked into the apartment. Julie greeted me with a smile and a kiss on the cheek like everything was perfectly normal. And maybe it was, for now. But Mark's words lingered in my thoughts like a splinter under my skin, hard to ignore and even harder to forget. After Mark's warning, I found myself spiraling into paranoia. It gnawed at me day and night until I couldn't stand it anymore. One morning, while Julie was in the shower, I slipped an Apple AirTag into her car. It was a desperate move, but I needed to know the truth. I spent the next few days glued to my phone, watching her movements like a hawk. For the most part, everything seemed normal. Home, work, grocery store. Then, halfway through her shift one day, I saw her car moving in a direction away from her office. The dot on the map continued down roads that didn't lead back to work. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the blinking dot on my screen. It finally stopped at a small cafe on the other side of town. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and headed out. Parking a few blocks away, I approached the cafe cautiously. Peering through the window, I saw her sitting at a corner table with some guy. He was leaning in close, talking animatedly, while she laughed and touched his arm lightly. That was all I needed to see. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture through the window before turning away and heading back to my car. The drive home was a blur of anger and betrayal. By the time I got back to our apartment, my hands were shaking with fury. Julie came home later that evening with a smile on her face like nothing had happened. It made my blood boil even more. "Caleb," she greeted me cheerfully. "How was your day?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself before speaking. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered as she noticed my serious tone. "What's wrong?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the picture of her with that guy at the cafe. "What's this?" My voice was cold as ice. Julie's eyes widened in surprise and then narrowed defensively. "That's not what it looks like." "Really?" I demanded. "Because it looks like you're having lunch with another guy when you're supposed to be at work." She stammered for a moment before finding her voice again. "He's just a friend from work. We were discussing a project." "I'm done listening to your lies," I snapped. "I'm talking to a lawyer." Her face went pale as my words sank in, but for once, she didn't have anything else to say. The silence between us was deafening as I turned away, leaving her standing there speechless and defeated. I decided to meet up with Tommy. The air between us felt thick with unresolved tension as we sat across from each other at the same booth in O'Malley's. He looked different, more worn out than the last time I saw him. "Caleb," he started, breaking the silence. "I'm really sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you like this." I took a deep breath, my fingers tapping against the cold beer bottle in front of me. "Tommy, I need you to know that I found out you were right about Julie." His eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I found her with another guy," I said flatly. "She's been lying to me again." Tommy leaned back in his seat, rubbing his temples. "Man, I didn't want to be right about that." "Neither did I admitted. "Look, Tommy, I'm not mad at you anymore. I know now that Julie's been playing both of us. But accepting your apology, that's something I can't do right now." He nodded slowly, understanding washing over his face. "I get it. If I were in your shoes, I'd probably feel the same way." We sat in silence for a few moments, the noise of the bar filling the gap between us. "I hope one day we can move past this," Tommy said quietly. "Maybe," I replied, not entirely convinced myself. After our meeting, I went straight to my lawyer's office. Sitting across from her desk, she outlined my options clearly and concisely. It was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "You have grounds for divorce," she explained. "And given the circumstances, you'll likely come out ahead in terms of assets, considering there aren't many assets to begin with." Hearing her lay out a clear path forward felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time since everything fell apart, I saw a way beyond this failed marriage. As I walked out of her office into the bright afternoon sun, a sense of clarity washed over me. It wouldn't be easy, but there was hope. Hope for a future where trust and betrayal didn't haunt my every waking moment. It was time to rebuild my life from the ground up, and maybe, just maybe, find peace again in the process.